Stand still. The voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the ballroom like glass. Hundreds of guests froze, champagne flutes midair as a crystal goblet tilted above Amara Collins' head. She had just stepped into the light, her name announced, her success applauded. Then the wine came down. Red streaked her silk dress. Droplets slid down her face. The cameras came up instantly. And then, laughter. Not nervous laughter, not shocked laughter, amused laughter. The boy's parents laughed the loudest. They didn't know it yet, but they had just humiliated the only woman capable of ending everything they owned. Amara didn't move. She didn't wipe her face. She didn't raise her voice. She stood there, soaked in wine, surrounded by privilege, mockery, and silence, and chose restraint over reaction. Because it was, in that moment, she wasn't deciding how to respond emotionally. She was deciding who would survive this night, and the people laughing had no idea they were already standing inside the ruins of their future. Before we continue, have you ever been underestimated or disrespected in a room you worked hard to enter? Stay with us. What happens next changes everything. Do not forget to like and subscribe to Speak Black Stories. Your support means a lot. God bless you. The chandeliers were flawless, cut crystal, imported, old money, perfect. They threw warm light across the ballroom of the Harrington Foundation Gala, scattering diamonds across marble floors and designer gowns. Every laugh in the room was polished, every handshake rehearsed, every smile calculated to be photographed later and remembered incorrectly. This was not a room built for women like Amara Collins, and yet, when her name was announced, the room shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough. Heads turned, conversation slowed. A ripple of curiosity passed through the crowd as Amara stepped forward, calm and composed, her posture straight, her movements deliberate. She wore a midnight blue silk gown, elegant, understated, expensive in a way that didn't beg for attention. She didn't need to. At 42, Amara Collins had done what most people in this room had never risked doing. She had built something from nothing. No inheritance, no safety net, no powerful last name to protect her mistakes. Just discipline, intelligence, and a lifetime of learning how to survive rooms that smiled while waiting for her to fail. Applause followed her entrance, polite, measured, the kind reserved for people who couldn't be ignored, but weren't fully welcomed either. She noticed who clapped. She noticed who didn't. Amara always noticed. Years ago, she had learned that silence often spoke louder than words in rooms like this. Silence told you who saw you as a threat. Silence told you who was already calculating how to control you. She moved through the crowd, acknowledging greetings with a soft nod, a brief smile. CEOs, senators, media figures, people who smiled, wide for cameras, and narrowed their eyes the moment lenses turned away. This gala was supposed to be a celebration, the Harrington Foundation's centennial anniversary, 100 years of legacy, innovation, and philanthropy. That word was everywhere tonight, etched on programs, repeated in speeches, whispered like a prayer that excused everything else. Amara had been invited as the keynote guest of honor. Her company, NovaGen Systems, had just signed preliminary negotiations for what would become one of the largest clean energy partnerships in the country. If it went through, the Harringtons needed it, and they knew it. What they didn't know, what no one in this room knew yet, was that Amara had already seen the cracks beneath their polished empire. Missing funds disguised as expansion costs, offshore accounts masked by shell subsidiaries, numbers that didn't quite balance, no matter how you arrange them. Tonight was supposed to be confirmation, a final test. She had promised herself one thing before stepping into this ballroom. If they show me who they really are tonight, I will believe them. Across the room, laughter burst out suddenly, too loud, too sharp. Amara's eyes lifted instinctively. A group had formed near the champagne fountain. Teenagers, privileged, untouchable. The sons and daughters of power, dressed in rebellion stitched from expensive fabric. At the center stood Elliot Harrington. 17, blonde, handsome in the way wealth engineers over generations. His tuxedo jacket was unbuttoned, his tie loose, rebellion carefully curated so it never crossed into consequence. He was holding a crystal wine goblet, and he was staring at her. Amara felt it immediately, the shift in the air. She had felt it before in boardrooms, in elevators, in quiet hallways after meetings where men smiled too long and listened too little. It was the look people wore when they thought they were untouchable. Elliot leaned toward his friends, whispering something. Phones came out. Laughter followed. His parents stood nearby. They saw him. They didn't stop him. His mother smiled like she was watching a clever trick. His father's mouth twitched with amusement, eyes already scanning the room as if preparing to explain whatever happened next. Amara exhaled slowly. There it is, she thought. The test. She could have stepped away, could have redirected, could have pretended not to notice. But she didn't. She stayed where she was, because shrinking had never saved her before. Elliot began walking toward her. Each step felt heavier than the last, not because she was afraid, but because she understood what moments like this cost. Not just reputations, not just deals, dignity. Every eye in the room followed him now. Conversations died. A hush settled, not of concern, but anticipation. People loved a spectacle, especially when it didn't involve them. He stopped inches from her, close enough that she could smell the wine. Nice dress, he said casually, tilting his head. Must have been expensive. Amara met his gaze, didn't smile, didn't flinch. Is there something you need? She asked calmly. His grin widened. Behind him, someone laughed. His parents didn't intervene. They watched. And then, Elliot lifted the goblet. Time slowed. The chandeliers glimmered overhead, cameras focused, breath caught in throats. And in that frozen second, as the glass tilted and gravity took over, Amara realized something with terrifying clarity. This room had already chosen its side. The wine began to fall, and no one stopped it. The wine hit her first like cold rain, then like fire. Red splashed across Amara's face, slid down her cheekbone, soaked into the silk of her gown. The fabric darkened instantly, the stain blooming outward like something alive. Drops pattered against the marble floor, each sound louder than the last in the sudden, suffocating silence. Someone gasped. Another person laughed. Then the laughter spread. Not nervous laughter, not shocked murmurs. Real laughter. The kind that settles into a room and dares anyone to challenge it. Elliot stepped back, the empty goblet dangling loosely from his fingers. His grin wavered for half a second, just long enough for uncertainty to flicker, then steadied when he heard his mother clap. "Oh my God," she laughed, hand to her chest. "Elliot, you're awful." Her phone was already raised, filming. His father chuckled too, shaking his head as if this were nothing more than a clumsy joke at a dinner party. "Careful," he said mildly. "That wine costs more than your tuition." More laughter, more phones. Amara stood perfectly still. Wine dripped from her lashes, from her chin, down her arms. The smell of it wrapped around her, sweet, sharp, unmistakable. She felt the silk cling to her skin, heavy now, ruined. But her face didn't change, not because she didn't feel it, because she did. Humiliation burned through her chest, sharp and sudden, followed by something deeper, older. A familiar ache she'd carried since childhood, since classrooms where teachers mistook her confidence for arrogance, since meetings where her ideas were praised only after someone else repeated them louder. This wasn't new, it was just public. Someone rushed forward with a napkin. A waiter, young, nervous. His hands shook as he offered it to her, eyes wide with apology he hadn't caused. "Miss, I... I'm so sorry," he whispered. Amara accepted the napkin slowly, dabbed once at her cheek. The room leaned in, hungry for reaction. Tears would have satisfied them. Anger would have justified them. A scene would have erased her credibility in a way no wine ever could. She gave them none of it. Instead, she looked at Elliot again. Up close now, she could see it. The faint crack in his bravado. The way his eyes searched the crowd, checking for approval. Checking that he was still safe. "You okay?" He's asked, trying to sound bored. "It's just wine." Amara folded the napkin carefully. Then she smiled. It wasn't warm. It wasn't kind. It was calm. "Thank you," she said softly. The words landed wrong. Confusion flickered across his face. "For what?" he scoffed. "For making something very clear," Amara replied. She turned away from him then, away from the laughter, away from the cameras, and began walking toward the stage. A murmur swept through the room. Whispers followed her like a shadow. What is she doing? Is she really going up there like that? Someone stop her. This is embarrassing. Wine continued to drip from her dress as she climbed the steps, each drop marking her path. The spotlight caught the stain in brutal clarity. No way to hide it. No way to pretend this hadn't happened. She reached the podium, placed her hands on either side. The microphone hummed softly. The room fell silent. Even Elliot's parents straightened now, smiles tightening. This wasn't part of the plan. This wasn't funny anymore. Amara lifted her gaze and let it rest on the crowd. "Good evening," she said. Her voice didn't shake. "I had prepared remarks tonight about partnership, about shared values, about the future." She paused. In light of recent events, those remarks no longer apply. A ripple of unease moved through the room. Somewhere near the front, Elliot's father stiffened. "Effective immediately," Amara continued, "Novagen Systems is withdrawing from all negotiations regarding our proposed strategic partnership with Harrington Global Energy." The room exploded. Gasps, shouts, chairs scraping back, phones lowered now, not to stop recording, but because hands had gone slack with shock. "What?" someone whispered. "That's a $600 million deal." Elliot's mother's smile collapsed. His father surged to his feet. "This is outrageous," he barked. "You can't." Amara didn't look at him. "Our company partners only with organizations whose leadership demonstrates integrity, accountability, and respect," she said evenly. "Tonight has made it abundantly clear that those standards are not shared here." She let the words sink in, then added almost gently, "We all make choices, and we all live with the consequences." Her eyes found Elliot one last time. The goblet had slipped from his fingers. It shattered on the marble floor. "I wish you all a pleasant evening," Amara concluded. She stepped away from the podium and walked off the stage. Behind her, the Harrington legacy cracked. But this was only the beginning. The laughter didn't stop immediately. It stumbled first, awkward, brittle, then collapsed into chaos. Voices collided, chairs scraped. Guests surged toward exits or toward Elliot and his parents, depending on where their instincts landed, distance or damage control. The chandeliers still glittered overhead, oblivious, casting warm light over a room that had just swallowed itself. Amara felt none of it behind her. She moved forward, steady and unhurried, heels clicking softly against marble that moments ago had seemed untouchable. Wine dripped from her sleeves, staining the steps behind her like a trail she had no intention of erasing. "Ms. Collins, wait!" A man in a gray suit rushed up beside her, breathless. One of the Harrington board members. He smelled of cologne and panic. "This doesn't have to be like this," he said urgently. "Let's talk privately. Emotions are high. Mine are not." Amara replied without slowing. She reached the foot of the stage. Cameras swarmed instantly, flashes exploding like lightning. Reporters who had been covering gala fashion now smelled blood in the water. "Ms. Collins, was this racially motivated? Are you suing the Harrington family? Did you plan to cancel the deal before tonight?" Her driver pulled up at the curb, the black sedan gliding into place, as if summoned by instinct alone. Before she entered, Amara turned, not toward the reporters, toward the ballroom. Through the glass doors, she could see them, Elliot standing frozen, his parents arguing in sharp, whispered fury. Phones everywhere now, but no one laughing anymore, faces tight with fear. She met Elliot's eyes across the distance, and for the first time she saw it. Regret, not for what he'd done, for what it had cost. The door closed behind her. The world outside went quiet. Inside the car, Amara finally exhaled. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with release, the kind that comes after holding yourself together for too long. Her reflection stared back at her in the darkened window, composed, dignified, wine-streaked. "You handled that with incredible restraint," her driver said softly. Amara said nothing. Her phone vibrated. Once, twice, then continuously. Messages stacked on the screen. Board members, investors, journalists, friends who knew exactly what this moment meant. She ignored them all. "What's happening online?" she asked instead. Her chief communications officer, Maya Chen, leaned forward from the back seat, eyes glued to her tablet. "It's everywhere," she said. "The video of the wine incident is already trending, but the clip of you canceling the deal, it's moving faster." Amara closed her eyes. "They're panicking," Maya continued. "Harrington Energy stock is dropping in after-hours trading. Analysts are speculating liquidity issues." Amara opened her eyes again. So it was true. The partnership hadn't just been convenient. It had been necessary. Good. The car pulled away from the venue as police lights began flashing behind them, not for protection but for crowd control. The gala had turned into a storm, and at its center stood a family who had never imagined being challenged. Back inside the Harrington ballroom, the illusion shattered, completely. "Turn that off," Elliot's mother hissed, grabbing at his phone as she realized he was still recording. He flinched. "I didn't mean to—" "Delete it," she snapped. "All of you. Delete everything." No one moved. Too many eyes, too many angles. Too late. Gregory Harrington's face had gone pale beneath the flush of anger. He was already on his phone, pacing, voice low and furious. "Get legal. Now. And find out who leaked this." A young woman near the back laughed nervously. "You can't unring a bell like that." Gregory spun toward her. "This is a misunderstanding," he barked. "She overreacted." But even as he said it, he knew how hollow it sounded, because people were already pulling up numbers, already whispering, already connecting dots. "Without that deal, they're exposed," someone murmured. "I heard their Asia expansion is leveraged against it." Did you see her face? She knew something. Elliot stood alone in the middle of it all. The laughter echoed in his head, replaying now with a different sound. Ugly. He hadn't expected this. He'd expected tears, or anger, or at least noise. He hadn't expected silence. He hadn't expected her to walk away. For the first time in his life, something he'd touched didn't bend. It broke. Across the city, Amara stepped into her penthouse and finally let the mask slip. The moment the door closed, her shoulders sagged. She kicked off her heels and crossed to the bathroom, peeling the ruined dress from her body. The wine had soaked deep into the fabric, heavy and sticky. She dropped it into the tub, stood under the shower, let hot water wash over her face, her hair, her skin. But the memory didn't rinse away. The laughter, the cameras, the moment the room chose entertainment over humanity. She rested her forehead against the tile and breathed. Then her phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. They needed that deal more than they let on. You just pulled the wrong thread. If you're willing to listen, I have proof. Amara stared at the screen. The water continued to fall. Slowly, deliberately, she reached out and turned it off. And for the first time that night, she smiled. Because she knew one thing with absolute certainty now. They were afraid. And fear made people careless. The empire had started to crack, and she was done standing still. The message stayed on Amara's screen long after the phone dimmed. She didn't reply. Not yet. People who reached out in moments like this were either opportunists or survivors. Experience had taught her the difference was revealed by patience. If the sender was real, they would wait. If they were bluffing, they would panic. Amara wrapped herself in a robe and stepped onto the balcony. The city stretched below her, lights flickering like a living thing. Somewhere across that skyline, the Harringtons were scrambling, phones ringing, favors being called in, narratives being rewritten in real time. She breathed in the cool air. This was the moment after impact, the moment when momentum chose a direction. Her phone buzzed again. Board emergency meeting requested. 8:00 a.m. Subject: Harrington fallout. Of course. She went back inside, poured herself a glass of water, and finally responded to the unknown number. If you have proof, you'll bring it. Tomorrow, 9 a.m., my office. The reply came instantly. Thank you. I've waited years for this. That gave her pause. Years. Morning came fast. Too fast. News vans were already lined outside her building when Amara stepped into her car. Headlines scrolled across giant screens mounted on sidewalks and cafe windows. CEO cancels $600 deal. After public humiliation, privilege, or protest. Nation divided, Harrington heir under fire. After gala incident, the tone shifted by the hour. Support poured in just as quickly as skepticism. Some praised her restraint. Others questioned her emotional fitness, familiar language, predictable patterns. By the time she reached her office, 3 board members were already waiting. This is a mess, one of them said bluntly before she had even sat down. No, Amara replied calmly. This is exposure. They stared at her. You embarrassed a legacy partner on a live stage, another board member said. There will be retaliation. Amara folded her hands. There already is. She slid a printed report across the table. Overnight stock movement. Harrington Energy had lost nearly 8% in after-hours trading. A silence followed. They were depending on our deal to stabilize their balance sheet, she continued. Pulling out didn't hurt their pride. It hit their survival. The board members exchanged glances. You're saying they were desperate, one said. I'm saying they were reckless, Amara replied, and desperate people make mistakes. Before anyone could respond, her assistant knocked and entered. Miss Collins, she said quietly, your 9 o'clock is here. Amara stood. Good, she said. This meeting just got interesting. The woman who entered her office did not look powerful. She was in her late 60s, dressed plainly, posture straight, but cautious. Gray hair pulled neatly back, hands clasped around a worn leather folder, as if it were the only thing anchoring her. Her eyes, however, were sharp, observant, the eyes of someone who had watched carefully for a very long time. My name is Ruth Calder, she said softly. I worked for the Harrington family for 26 years. The room went still. I was a house manager, Ruth continued. Cleaner, scheduler, fixer, invisible. Amara gestured for her to sit. You messaged me last night, Amara said. Yes, Ruth swallowed. Because when I saw what they did to you, I knew it was time. She placed the folder on the desk. Inside were notebooks, receipts, flash drives, carefully labeled, meticulously organized. I kept records, Ruth said. Everything they said when they thought no one important was listening. The way they talked about employees, about regulators, about moving money. Amara didn't touch the folder yet. "Why keep this?" she asked. Ruth's mouth tightened. "Because people like them don't fall unless someone remembers." She opened one notebook. Dates, times, names. Gregory Harrington instructs finance to reroute funds through offshore entity. Melissa Harrington jokes about silencing an employee complaint with a settlement bonus. Board aware. No objections. Amara felt something shift in her chest. Not shock, but confirmation. "How much?" she asked. Ruth met her gaze. "At least 900 million. Hidden, moved, disguised." There it was, the number. The weight of it settled into the room like gravity. "They needed your deal," Ruth continued. "Not for growth, to plug holes, to survive the next audit." Amara closed the folder, slowly, carefully. "Are you willing to stand by this?" she asked. "Publicly?" Ruth nodded. "I'm tired of being invisible." Amara leaned back in her chair. Then she smiled, not with satisfaction, but with resolve. "Then we do this properly," she said, "legally, loudly, and in daylight." Across town, the Harringtons were unraveling. Gregory Harrington slammed his fist into the conference table. "Find out who's talking." "We don't know yet," his legal counsel said, "but the rumors are spreading. Regulators are sniffing around." Melissa paced. "She's turning this into a crusade. We need to flip the narrative." "And how do you suggest we do that?" Gregory snapped. Melissa stopped, smiled slowly. "We make her the villain," she said. We question her stability, her motives, her past." Gregory exhaled. "Yes," he said. "That's better." Across the table, Elliot sat silent. For the first time, no one was looking at him like he was clever or untouchable. And deep down, he knew something terrifying had happened. They weren't laughing anymore. They were afraid. And fear had a way of pulling truths to the surface, whether anyone was ready or not. The thread had been pulled, and the empire was beginning to unravel. The first lie appeared before noon. It slid onto social media wrapped in concern, disguised as commentary. A grainy screenshot of Amara at a past conference. An anonymous post questioning whether she had a history of emotional decision-making. Within minutes, it was picked up by smaller blogs, then echoed by larger ones, each adding a little more speculation, a little less context. By afternoon, the narrative had teeth. Amara watched it unfold from her office, arms crossed, expression unreadable, as Maya scrolled through the feeds. "They're shifting the focus," Maya said. "Away from the wine, away from the kid, away from the money. And on to me," Amara finished. "Exactly." Amara nodded once. That was inevitable. When power panicked, it didn't defend itself with truth. It attacked credibility. It reached for stereotypes. It weaponized doubt. Her phone rang. "Board chair." She answered calmly. "Aye," he said, skipping pleasantries. "We're getting pressure. Investors are nervous. Harrington's legal team is calling this a breach of good faith." "Let them," Amara replied. "They're trying to intimidate us into silence." A pause. "Is there anything we don't know?" Amara glanced at Ruth's folder on her desk. "Yes," she said. "And soon, everyone else will too." She ended the call and turned to Maya. "Prep legal," Amara said. "Full documentation, whistleblower protection. I want everything verified twice." Maya hesitated. "They won't stay subtle much longer." "No," Amara agreed. "They'll escalate." She just hadn't expected how fast. By evening, a video surfaced, released accidentally by a so-called insider. It showed a dim hallway, security footage, time-stamped the night of the gala. A figure resembling Amara stood close to Elliot, body language sharp, finger raised. The audio, distorted but clear enough, captured a voice saying, "You don't know who you're dealing with." The internet exploded. "This changes everything." She threatened a minor? Was the wine incident provoked? Amara felt the floor shift beneath her. Maya slammed the tablet down. "That's fake." "I know," Amara said quietly. But knowing didn't stop damage. Phones rang nonstop. Partners paused contracts. One major client sent a short, devastating email. "Pending investigation, all projects are suspended." Amara closed her eyes for 1 second. Then she stood. "Get Ruth," she said. "And legal. Now." Across town, the Harringtons watched the chaos with grim satisfaction. Gregory loosened his tie, finally allowing himself a smile. "That should slow her down." Melissa nodded. "People don't care about facts. They care about doubt." Elliot sat stiffly on the couch, eyes fixed on the screen as commentators debated whether Amara had crossed a line. "That didn't happen," he muttered. Melissa turned sharply. "What?" "She never talked to me before," Elliot said. "Not once." Gregory's smile vanished. "You will say nothing," he warned. "Do you understand?" Elliot swallowed. For the first time in his life, obedience felt like fear. Back in Amara's office, Ruth stared at the video in disbelief. "They're lying," she whispered. "I was with staff all night. She never left the ballroom." Amara leaned forward. "Say that again." "I saw her," Ruth repeated. "She went straight to the stage. There was no hallway confrontation." Maya's eyes lit up. "The footage. Can we analyze it?" Amara nodded. "Frame by frame." They pulled in a forensic consultant within the hour. The room filled with screens, timelines, metadata charts. "There," the consultant said finally, freezing the image. "See that reflection? In the brass door handle." They zoomed in. The hallway was empty. No figures. No confrontation. "Composite overlay," the consultant confirmed. They stitched her image into pre-existing footage. Sloppy, but convincing if you don't look closely. Amara exhaled slowly. "They rushed it," she said, "because they're scared." Her phone buzzed again. Board chair. This time his voice shook. "The board is calling an emergency session tomorrow morning. Some members are questioning your leadership." Amara smiled faintly. "Good," she said. "Tell them I'll be there. And tell them to invite the press." Silence. "The press?" "Yes," Amara replied. "If they want a spectacle, we'll give them one they can't edit." That night, Amara didn't sleep. She sat at her dining table, surrounded by evidence. Ruth's notebooks, financial records, forensic reports. Decades of arrogance documented in ink and numbers. At 2:17 a.m., a new email arrived. Internal Harrington memo, urgent. Subject, asset concealment contingency. It detailed plans to move remaining funds offshore, to destroy backups, to pressure regulators. They weren't just lying. They were running. Amara forwarded everything to legal and regulators. Then she drafted one final message. Press conference. Tomorrow, 9 a.m., live, unedited. She hit send. Outside, helicopters hovered, media circling like vultures. Inside, Amara stood alone by the window, watching the city glow beneath her. They had tried to humiliate her, then discredit her. Now they had handed her something far more dangerous than sympathy. They had handed her proof, and by morning the laughter would be gone, replaced by something the Harringtons had never learned how to survive: consequences. Morning arrived sharp and unforgiving. By 8:30 a.m., the plaza outside Novagen headquarters was unrecognizable. News vans lined the curb 3 deep. Satellite dishes pointed skyward like metallic flowers. Reporters paced, rehearsing lines, murmuring into headsets. Every major network was present. So were the ones that thrived on spectacle. Amara stood in her office, dressed in a crisp white suit, not by accident. White showed stains. White showed nothing hidden. White dared anyone to accuse it of darkness. Maya adjusted her earpiece. "We're live in 12 minutes. Ruth sat nearby, hands folded around her leather folder. She looked smaller than she had the day before, but steadier, braver. "You don't have to do this," Amara said gently. Ruth lifted her chin. "I've been quiet my whole life. I'm not starting now." A knock at the door. "Boards assembled," Amara's assistant said. "And they brought cameras." Amara smiled once. "Good." The conference hall buzzed like a live wire. Board members sat stiffly at the long table, eyes darting between Amara and the glass wall behind her, where journalists pressed forward, lenses trained. Some directors looked ashamed. Others looked angry. All looked afraid. The board chair cleared his throat. "This session is to address concerns regarding leadership stability and reputational risk." Amara stood. "Before we begin," she said calmly, "I want the record to reflect that everything shared today will be public." Murmurs rippled. "You can't," someone began. "I can," Amara said, turning slightly so the cameras caught her full profile. "And I will." She nodded to Maya. "Theet." Screens behind them came alive. The fake hallway video appeared first. Gasps filled the room. "Watch closely," Amara said. "Not the narrative. The details." The footage slowed, zoomed, paused. "There," the forensic consultant's voice narrated. "Reflection mismatch, timestamp inconsistency, editing artifacts consistent with post-production manipulation. The image split in two, original hallway feed versus altered overlay." Silence fell. "That video," Amara said evenly, "was fabricated to portray me as a threat. It was released to distract from something far more dangerous to its creators." The screen changed. Financial records, transfer logs, offshore accounts. "This," she continued, "is the real story." Ruth stood. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied. "For 26 years," she said, "I worked in the Harrington household. I saw how money moved, how complaints disappeared, how people were paid to forget." She opened a notebook. March 14th, ordered to alter payroll records. June 2nd, settlement disguised as consulting fee. November 19th, funds rerouted through shell entity. Each date landed like a hammer. The board chair swallowed. Amara stepped forward again. "The Harrington partnership was not a growth opportunity," she said. "It was a lifeline for them. They intended to use Novagen to launder credibility and hide losses totaling over $900 million. A reporter shouted, "Do you have proof?" Amara nodded. "Federal authorities do too." As if summoned by the words, movement stirred outside the glass wall. Heads turned. Dark vehicles rolled into view. Agents stepped out. Badges caught the sunlight. The room erupted. Phones lifted. Voices overlapped. Board members stood abruptly, chairs scraping. Amara didn't flinch. "This meeting is adjourned," she said calmly. "There will be no vote today or tomorrow." She looked directly into the camera. "When power panics, it lies," she said. "When it lies, it leaves trails. And when those trails are followed, empires fall." She stepped away from the table. Ruth followed. Across the city, chaos reigned. Harrington Energy's headquarters swarmed with agents. Employees streamed out carrying boxes, faces pale. Trading screens flashed red as the stock plunged, then froze, halted. Inside a corner office, Gregory Harrington watched it all unfold on mute. Melissa paced behind him, frantic. "Say something. Call someone." "There's no one left," Gregory whispered. His phone buzzed. "Board emergency session. Unanimous vote pending." The door burst open. "Gregory Harrington," an agent said, "you're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, obstruction of justice, and witness tampering. Melissa screamed. Cameras caught everything. The stumble, the cuffs, the moment the man who laughed at a woman drenched in wine was forced to bow his head. By afternoon, the story had shifted. Not was Amara unstable, but how deep did the corruption go? Former employees came forward, then more. Stories matched Ruth's records perfectly. Dates, names, payments. The public didn't just believe, they recognized. Outside Novagen, the crowd changed tone. Applause replaced shouting. Signs rose. Integrity isn't optional. Truth wins. We saw you. Amara watched from her office window as the sun dipped low. Maya entered quietly. The board sent a statement, unanimous support. Your position is secure. Amara nodded. And Harrington? She asked. Maya smiled grimly. Finished. Amara exhaled, not in triumph, in release. That evening, Amara sat alone on her balcony again, city lights glowing below. Her phone buzzed one last time. A message from an unknown number. You broke them. She typed back, slowly. No, they were already broken. I just stopped, pretending not to see it. She set the phone down. The laughter from that night felt distant now, thin, powerless, extinct. Daylight had done what darkness never could. It had told the truth, and nothing built on lies survives the sun. The city didn't sleep that night, even after the arrests, even after the trading halt, even after the headlines stopped updating for a few precious hours. The noise lingered, screens glowing in apartments, phones buzzing on nightstands, conversations spilling out of bars and onto sidewalks. An empire had fallen. People wanted to watch the dust settle. Amara sat alone in her penthouse, lights dimmed, a single lamp casting a soft glow across the room. Her white suit lay folded neatly on a chair. She hadn't changed it yet, not out of stubbornness, but because it felt important to remember how the day had begun. Ruth's notebooks were stacked on the coffee table, their worn covers a quiet contrast to the glass and steel surrounding them. Proof didn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looked patient. Amara poured herself a glass of water and sat. Only now, did the weight arrive. Her hands trembled slightly as she set the glass down. The adrenaline that had carried her through the press conference, the board confrontation, the cameras, the agents, it all receded at once, leaving a hollow stillness behind. She closed her eyes. The wine came back first. The cold splash, the laughter. The moment her body had wanted to react before her mind caught up. Then came the other memories, the quieter ones. Boardrooms where she'd been talked over. Deals she'd won only after proving herself twice. Rooms she'd entered knowing she was already being measured, judged, weighed against standards no one else carried. Tonight wasn't just about the Harringtons. It was about every time she had swallowed something sharp and smiled anyway. Her phone vibrated. She almost ignored it. Almost. A message from her mother. I saw the news. I'm so proud of you. But baby, are you okay? That was the one that cracked her. Amara leaned forward, elbows on her knees, and let out a breath that sounded dangerously close to a sob. She typed back slowly. I am now. I wasn't before, but I am now. She set the phone aside and stared out at the city. Power, she realized, didn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it whispered. Sometimes it laughed. Sometimes it poured wine and expected silence in return. And sometimes, it finally met resistance. Across town, the Harrington house was no longer lit. The gates were closed. The driveway empty except for one abandoned car left crooked in haste. Inside, rooms once designed to impress now felt cavernous, stripped of purpose. Melissa Harrington sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at a phone that hadn't stopped buzzing all day. Lawyers, former friends, numbers she didn't recognize, all saying the same thing. They couldn't help her. Across the room, Elliot sat on the floor, back against the wall, knees pulled to his chest. His tuxedo jacket lay discarded nearby, wine stains still faintly visible on the cuff. He hadn't spoken in hours. He kept replaying the moment, the way the glass had felt in his hand, the sound it made when it emptied, the silence that followed. He hadn't meant for it to go this far. That was the lie he kept telling himself. What he meant, what he was only just beginning to understand, was that he hadn't meant for consequences to exist. Now they did, and they had names and charges and faces on television. He buried his face in his hands. For the first time in his life, laughter didn't feel safe. The next morning, Novagen's lobby filled with flowers. Hundreds of them, notes attached, cards, handwritten messages. Thank you for saying what we couldn't. I worked for them once too. You stood when they wanted you small. Amara walked through the lobby quietly, acknowledging no one, reading everything. Some stories were short, some were devastating. All of them carried the same truth. What happened at the gala hadn't been an exception. It had been a pattern finally exposed. Maya joined her at the elevator. You've become something bigger than this company, she said carefully. Amara shook her head. No, I've just stopped pretending this company exists outside the world. The elevator doors closed. At the emergency board meeting later that day, the mood was different. No tension, no posturing, only resolve. We'd like to formally apologize, the board chair said, standing. For doubting you, for hesitating. Amara met his gaze. Apologies matter, she said, but systems matter more. She outlined the changes calmly. New ethics oversight, transparent audits, protections for employees who spoke up, real ones, not performative. Language. This is the standard now, she concluded, not because of what happened to me, because of what happens when we ignore what's happening to others. The vote was unanimous. Again. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Amara returned to the balcony one last time before night fell. The city looked the same, but it wasn't. Somewhere, a family was learning what it felt like to be untouchable no longer. Somewhere else, a worker was watching the news and realizing silence wasn't the only option. Amara rested her hands on the railing. She hadn't planned to be a symbol. She still didn't want to be one. But she understood now that visibility wasn't always a choice. Sometimes it was a responsibility that arrived uninvited, like wine in a glass tipped too far. Behind her, her phone buzzed again. A single message from Ruth. Thank you for seeing me, for believing me. Amara smiled softly. She typed back, thank you for remembering. That's how empires really fall. The city lights flickered on, one by one. And for the first time since the gala, the night felt quiet, not empty. Peaceful. The backlash didn't arrive loudly. It crept in, quiet phone calls, delayed emails, meetings that were suddenly rescheduled indefinitely. Amara noticed it within 48 hours. At first glance, everything looked fine. Novagen's stock stabilized. Public support remained strong. Headlines still framed her as the woman who stood her ground. But power rarely fights in public once it loses. It retaliates in private. Maya was the first to say it out loud. They're freezing us out, she said, sliding a tablet across Amara's desk. Not officially, not on paper, but enough to slow us down. Amara scanned the list. Banking partners requesting temporary reviews. Regulatory agencies announcing routine audits. Vendors suddenly demanding new terms. A familiar pattern. They can't touch us directly, Amara said, so they're squeezing around the edges. Old networks, Maya replied. People who benefited from the Harrington's silence. They're scared you've changed the rules. Amara leaned back. That's because I have. The first formal strike came 3 days later. A letter, stamped, legal, cold, subject, notice of leadership review, pursuant to fiduciary concerns raised by market instability. The wording was careful, polite, designed to sound reasonable, but the message beneath it was clear. You embarrassed people who don't forget. The board chair called within minutes of the letter landing. Before you ask, no, he said quickly. We're not turning on you, but some institutional investors are pushing hard. They want reassurance. Amara closed her eyes briefly. Reassurance of what? She asked. That you won't destabilize things again. There it was. She smiled faintly. Tell them this, she said. Integrity isn't instability. Corruption is. Silence. I'll handle it, the chair said finally. Amara ended the call and stood, walking to the window. She'd expected this. What surprised her wasn't the resistance. It was how lonely it felt. That night, Amara dreamed of the ballroom again. But this time, the room was empty. No laughter, no cameras, no chandeliers. Just her, standing alone, holding the glass. She woke before dawn, heart racing. By the time the sun rose, she was already dressed. Ruth arrived mid-morning, carrying coffee and a folded newspaper. They're circling you, Ruth said plainly. Same way they circled anyone who didn't play along. Amara accepted the coffee. I know, Ruth hesitated. That video they released, the fake one, someone's going to answer for that. Amara looked up sharply. What do you mean? Ruth lowered her voice. I got a call last night from someone inside Harrington's old IT department. He's scared. He says he knows who altered the footage. Amara's pulse quickened. Did he say who ordered it? Ruth nodded once. Gregory, directly. That changed things. Where is he now? Amara asked. Bail hearing tomorrow, Ruth replied, but that won't be public. Amara stared at the table. Not yet, she said. The meeting was scheduled quietly, too quietly. A private room, no press, no statements, just Amara, her legal counsel, and a federal investigator who looked like he'd slept in his suit. The altered video, he said, opening a file. We have confirmation it was produced after the gala. Internal timestamps, edit logs, and witness testimony. Amara nodded. And? She asked. And we need to know if you're willing to testify to its impact. Amara didn't answer immediately. Testifying meant reopening everything. More scrutiny, more attacks, more attempts to paint her as unstable, vindictive, dangerous. The investigator waited. She thought of the night she stood still while wine soaked her dress, of how easy it would have been to stay quiet afterward, to take the win and move on. She met his gaze. Yes, she said. I'll testify. News of the potential charges leaked within hours. Not from her camp. Never from her camp. By evening, headlines shifted again. Doctored video may lead to additional charges. Former energy executive accused of manipulating evidence. Public opinion hardened. This wasn't about a misunderstanding anymore. It was about power trying and failing to rewrite reality. But backlash followed swiftly. Social media turned sharp. Anonymous accounts resurfaced old photos, old speeches, old moments stripped of context. She likes attention. She's enjoying this. She's dangerous. Amara read none of it. Maya did, and filtered what mattered. Someone leaked your mother's old arrest, Maya said carefully one evening. 30 years ago. A bad check. Medical emergency. Amara's jaw tightened. Of course they did. They're implying a pattern, Maya added. Instability, dishonesty. Amara laughed once, a short, humorless sound. They couldn't break me, she said, so they're reaching for ghosts. That night she called her mother. I'm sorry, Amara said before her mother could speak. For what? Her mother replied. For dragging you into this. There was a pause. Then her mother said softly, "Baby, I survived worse than this, so you wouldn't have to be quiet." Amara swallowed hard. The testimony was scheduled for the following week, closed session, but nothing stayed closed for long anymore. On the morning of the hearing, Amara stood outside the federal building, reporters shouting questions she didn't answer. Inside, the room was small, plain, no cameras. Gregory Harrington sat at the far end of the table. He looked smaller than she remembered, older. When his eyes met hers, something flickered there. Not anger, recognition. "You ruined my family," he said quietly as the room settled. Amara didn't respond. She waited. The investigator spoke. Evidence was presented, files opened, timelines reconstructed. Then Amara was asked to speak. She stood, not as a CEO, not as a symbol, but as a woman who had been lied about, publicly and deliberately. "They poured wine on me," she said evenly, and laughed. "That was humiliation." She paused. What came after was attempted erasure. She described the fake footage, the smear campaign, the coordinated pressure. "And this," she concluded, "is why I'm here. Not because my reputation matters more than anyone else's, but because if lies like this work once, they will be used again." Silence followed. Gregory said nothing. For the first time, he had nothing left to spin. When Amara left the building hours later, the city felt different, heavier, but clearer. Maya met her at the car. "You did the right thing," she said. Amara nodded. "I know," she replied, "but now comes the hardest part." "What's that?" Amara looked out at the street. "Living in the world after the truth," she said. Victory was louder than Amara expected. She had imagined relief, closure, maybe even quiet satisfaction. Instead, winning came with noise. Phones rang nonstop. Interview requests stacked up faster than Maya could decline them. Invitations arrived from conferences, boards, global forums, places that had never made room for her before, now eager to place her at the center. Icon, trailblazer, symbol of courage. The words followed her everywhere. And somehow, they felt heavier than the wine-soaked dress ever had. Amara stood at her office window watching traffic below, the city moving with its usual indifference. People were late for meetings. Someone laughed on a sidewalk. A delivery truck honked impatiently. Life went on, but hers had shifted permanently. "You don't have to say yes to everything," Maya reminded her gently, holding a tablet full of unread emails. "I know," Amara said, but she also knew what saying no meant. Silence rushed in to fill empty spaces, and silence, was where lies regrouped. The Harrington case accelerated faster than anyone expected. Once the testimony about the doctored video became public record, the dam broke. Former executives turned state's evidence. Paper trails multiplied. Financial institutions scrambled to distance themselves. The empire didn't just fall. It imploded. One afternoon, Amara sat with Ruth in a quiet cafe away from cameras. They chose a corner, a table. No one recognized them at first. "This place used to terrify me," Ruth said softly, staring into her tea. "I was always afraid I'd run into someone who remembered me as the help." "And now?" Amara asked. Ruth smiled faintly. "Now I don't hide." That mattered more than any headline. Amara's phone buzzed. Another update. Harrington Energy to be dismantled under federal oversight. Assets frozen. Foundation dissolved. $900 million. Gone. Amara stared at the screen longer than she expected, not in triumph, in disbelief. That number used to feel abstract, she said quietly. Now it just feels sad. Ruth nodded. Money doesn't rot on its own. People rot around it. The first real crack came from inside Novagen, an email from a senior executive, one she trusted. We need to talk, off record. They met after hours. He looked uncomfortable, hands clasped too tightly. Some investors are nervous, he began. They think you're unpredictable now. Amara raised an eyebrow. Because I didn't accept humiliation quietly? He hesitated. Because you challenged people they're connected to. She leaned back. And they want assurances you won't keep doing that. Amara let the silence stretch. Finally, she asked, Do you? He exhaled. I want the company protected. So do I, she said calmly. That's why I'll do it again if necessary. His eyes widened slightly. You can't fight every injustice, he warned. No, Amara agreed, but I can fight the ones that show up in my boardroom. He left soon after. The door closed softly behind him. Amara sat alone, the hum of the building filling the space. Power always tested boundaries after a shift. This was the test. That night, she attended her first public event since the hearings. A university auditorium, students, faculty, cameras. She stood backstage listening to the murmur of the crowd, hands clasped, heart steady. When she stepped into the light, applause erupted. Not polite applause, real applause, sustained, emotional. She waited for it to die down before speaking. I want to say something uncomfortable, she began, because comfort is how systems survive. The room quieted. People keep calling what happened to me brave. It wasn't. It was necessary. She paused. Bravery implies choice. I didn't choose to be humiliated. I chose what to do next. She spoke of restraint, of strategy, of the myth that professionalism required silence. Respectability, she said, is often just another word for obedience. A ripple moved through the audience. Winning didn't feel like I thought it would, she admitted, because winning doesn't erase what came before. It just proves it mattered. She ended without flourish, without slogans. When she left the stage, she felt lighter, not because the weight was gone, but because it had been shared. Late that evening, alone again, Amara sat at her kitchen table scrolling through old photos on her phone. Her first office, a folding desk, a borrowed laptop. She stopped on a picture of herself years earlier, tired, younger, smiling anyway. She wondered what that woman would think now. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. I watched what you did. I'm in a position to stop something similar before it happens. Would you advise me? Amara stared at the message for a long moment. Then she typed back, Yes, but only if you're ready to be uncomfortable. She set the phone down. Outside, the city hummed. Victory hadn't brought peace, but it had brought something else, momentum. And Amara understood now that winning wasn't an ending. It was a responsibility, one she intended to carry, open-eyed, unafraid, and done pretending that silence was the price of survival. The empire had fallen, but the world it came from was still standing, and she wasn't finished yet. The morning after the final ruling, the city felt strangely quiet. No breaking alerts, no sirens, no urgent calls demanding statements. Just sunlight spilling across glass towers and streets returning to routine. Harrington Energy no longer existed. The name that once carried weight, fear, privilege, inevitability, had been reduced to past tense. Its assets were frozen, its board dissolved, its foundation shuttered. Executives faced charges. Settlements were pending. Investigations spread outward like cracks in ice, reaching other companies that had watched for years and said nothing. The empire was gone. And yet, Amara felt no triumph when she read the confirmation. She closed her laptop and sat still for a long moment, hands resting on the table. This was what the end looked like. Quiet. At Novagen, the work continued. Not dramatically, not ceremoniously. Engineers reviewed designs. Analysts ran projections. Teams debated timelines. The future, stubborn and practical, refused to pause for symbolism. Amara walked the floor that afternoon, stopping to speak with people who had avoided eye contact weeks earlier. Some smiled now. Some looked relieved. Some still looked uncertain. Change unsettled even those it protected. At the far end of the office, a young woman stood waiting near the conference rooms, nervous, early 20s, clutching a notebook to her chest like armor. "Ms. Collins?" she asked when Amara approached. I wanted to thank you." "For what?" Amara asked gently. "For making it easier to speak," the woman said. "I filed a report yesterday about my previous job. I wouldn't have before." Amara nodded slowly. "That matters," she said, "no matter what happens next." The woman smiled, small, real, and walked away lighter than she'd arrived. Amara stood there a moment longer, absorbing the truth she'd been circling for weeks. Empires didn't fall because of heroes. They fell because people stopped accepting the cost of silence. That evening, Amara met Ruth one last time before Ruth relocated under federal protection. They sat in a park just outside the city, leaves stirring gently in the breeze. No cameras, no microphones. Just two women who had carried truth differently, and finally put it down. "I don't know what I'll do next," Ruth admitted. "I spent so long watching, remembering, holding on." Amara smiled softly. "Now you get to live without guarding the past." Ruth reached into her bag and pulled out one final notebook. "I want you to have this," she said. "Not as evidence, just as history." Amara accepted it with care. "I don't regret it," Ruth added. "Any of it." "Neither do I," Amara said. They hugged, brief, steady, without ceremony. When Ruth walked away, Amara didn't follow. Some journeys ended by design. Later that night, alone in her penthouse, Amara took the notebook Ruth had given her and opened to a random page. A date, a name, a quiet observation written by someone who had believed no one would ever read it. She closed the book. The temptation to memorialize the story, to freeze it into something neat and finished, pressed at her. But life didn't move in chapters. It moved forward. Her phone buzzed. A message from the board. "We'd like to propose a new initiative. Independent Oversight Fund. Your name attached, if you approve." Amara considered it, then typed back. "Do it without my name. Make it the standard, not the exception." She set the phone down. This wasn't about legacy. It never had been. Weeks passed. The headlines faded. Other scandals rose to take their place. But something subtle had shifted. Deals were structured differently. Language changed in meetings. Executives paused where they once barreled forward. Not everywhere, not perfectly, but enough to matter. Amara noticed it most when she entered rooms that once felt hostile. The silence was different now, not dismissive, watchful, respectful. One evening, months later, Amara attended another gala. Different city, different cause. Same kind of room. Crystal lights, soft music, carefully curated laughter. As she stepped inside, conversation slowed. Not because she didn't belong, because she did. A waiter passed with a tray of wine glasses. Amara took one, held it, then set it back down untouched. Not out of fear, out of choice. Across the room, she caught her reflection in a mirrored wall, older, steadier, unchanged at the core. She thought of the woman she'd been standing under chandeliers months earlier, wine soaking into silk while laughter echoed. She wished she could tell her something. Not reassurance, not prophecy, just this: you will not disappear. The band struck up a new song. The room resumed its rhythm. Life moved forward again, and Amara moved with it. Not hardened, not heroic, not broken, just awake. The empire had fallen, but what remained was something far more dangerous to the old world than any single collapse. A woman who had learned she didn't have to stand still anymore.